Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. This week, I want to talk to you about six-time Mr. Olympia winner Dorian Yates and some criticism I saw directed at him by a coach out of the UK. This coach wasn't necessarily the most famous guy in the world, so it's not a huge dramatic issue, but the criticisms that were directed at Dorian I thought were probably a little unfair, and if seen by other people, they might take those criticisms to heart and apply them to their own training. So I want to point out where I think this coach who was criticizing Dorian went wrong and where you can maybe go right. Dorian was being criticized because he was trying some workouts with a company called Functional Patterns. If you haven't seen these guys before, their workouts consist of very unorthodox movements with a lot of swinging around kettlebells and dumbbells. They do a lot of twisting movements and switching stances. They're also very, very aggressively critical of traditional bodybuilding, powerlifting, and strength and conditioning movements. And this coach was very critical of Dorian because he had gone from training how he had trained in the past as a bodybuilder to this functional pattern system, which is a pretty controversial one. And I agree with that coach's initial critique, which is that in order to get athletes bigger, stronger, in better shape, these movements are not the way to go. You need to stick with the tried and true basics: squats, hip hinges, upper body presses and pulls, sprints, stuff like that. These twisting movements where you're kind of spinning around and going through the transverse plane are not what's going to build the foundation of your athleticism anywhere near as effectively as the traditional movements are. So I agree with that UK coach's critique in and of itself, saying that the functional pattern system is not effective. I agree with that. What I don't agree with is that this coach basically went on to argue that Dorian shouldn't be doing these movements because it's going to set a bad example for beginners who are going to think that this is, for whatever reason, the best way to get big and strong, which, as I stated earlier, it's not, and I don't agree with the idea that it is. But the idea that you can, one, tell people how they can or can't train is obviously ridiculous. The second thing is saying people shouldn't train a certain way because it sets a bad example for beginners, I think takes away some of the agency from beginners that's really, really important to them becoming successful and independent athletes. You need to go, and to some extent, do stupid things in the gym so that you can learn why they don't work for yourself. One of the great things about working out is it's such a visceral individual experience. You find out things don't work because you can feel it. They hurt or they don't feel right. I'm not necessarily saying people need to go and get injured in order to learn, but trying to set this standard that Dorian shouldn't be doing these workouts because then people are going to have wrong think about certain exercises is ridiculous. Beginners should be able to go out there, experiment with things that are not effective so that they can better understand and appreciate what is effective. Not to mention the fact that Dorian spent over 4 decades doing the right movements, quote unquote, to make himself the best bodybuilder he could be. If anybody had earned the right to try some weird, experimental, possibly not effective workouts, it's Dorian Yates. He looks great. He's in good shape. He wants to do different things to stay active, to challenge himself, because he ran his head into the wall for 40 years doing the hardest, most effective exercises he could do. And now it's just about being healthy. It's about maintaining muscle mass and feeling good while he's in his 60s and only getting older. And I couldn't help but be further bothered by the fact that this was a UK coach. And in the UK, if you've been paying attention, they really don't like freedom of speech over there. If you go on Facebook and say that you don't like beans on toast, the constable and Sergeant Pepper come down to your apartment and put you in handcuffs. But at the end of the day, while there's absolutely an effective and an ineffective way to train, if Dorian Yates wants to do Russian ballet with a 25-pound dumbbell in his hand, he's earned the right to do that. He's in his 60s, he's retired, and I would assume that his goals are to stay healthy, pain free, and be active so that he can feel good going into the later decades of his life. And it's not like he's going to squeeze any more juice out of the bench press or the lat pull down. He's not going to beat his best set of 10 on the leg press. So he's moving on to other things that allow him to still work out. You, on the other hand, who are somewhere between 15 and 35, and you weigh under 200 pounds and can't bench press 225, you should probably stick to the basics. Squat, bench, deadlift, pull-ups, sprints, but don't let anybody force you into training a certain way because they say they've got it all figured out. Experiment with things, have fun, stay healthy, and ultimately figure out what works for you.